I have given talks for the Native Plant Society for, I guess, my first invited one was maybe 18 years ago, right when I got here. And I remember people saying like that was way too much data. Like there's this, like I came out of grad school and I was taking my postdoc. I did my postdoc in Mexico, and I was just reared to go, ready for science, and there was a lot of data. And so I have found over the years that the best thing I can do is present like some topics that I'm interested in, some ideas, current ideas, and then really open things up for you to ask me questions. So let me tell you a little bit about my background, and then that will give you an idea of what kinds of questions you can ask me. Because what people really want to know is what to plant in their yards or on their ranches. And this is what I find over and over again, that people just want me to come to their ranch and tell them what to do. What to do. So here's my background. So I actually have an undergraduate degree in international relations, and I am a specialist in Latin American affairs. And I'm fluent Spanish, and I lived abroad. And then I decided, okay, I'm going to go to med school and do like Doctors Without Borders or something like that. So I came back to I'm from San Antonio, so I went to school at American University. And I came back home and I went to Trinity, where I work now, surprisingly. I started doing my sciences, and I started thinking more about like being a physician. I don't know, there's a lot of humans on the planet. Do they really need my help? And I was super dogmatic about it. I got really dogmatic about it. But a girlfriend of mine just happened to vacate her apartment in San Francisco. These are the days, right, when you could just move like on a whim. And so I moved there and I started hiking and camping, and I was dating somebody who was an Eagle Scout and a duck hunter. And so I started looking at waterfowl up close and just using field guides. And I thought, wow, do people look at plants all the time for a living? And I figured that people did. And so I called my dad, super kind of Irish immigrant mentality. And I called him up and I said, I think I'm going to withdraw my applications to med school and become a botanist. And I said, did you ever have like an existential crisis like that? And he said, no, because I was too poor. And he's like, that's what I was on a payphone too. That's how long ago it was. And he said, that's what rich Victorian British people do, right? So anyway, so I enrolled. What's that? Sure. I'm wearing so many things here. No, I'm kidding. Sure, no problem. So I enrolled at UC Davis, and I did a master's in ecological physiology of plants, which is super fun. But then I really wanted to move more into ecology. Are you from UC Davis? No. Okay. Oh, you did? Okay, plant physics, it's really fun. And then I wanted to do more ecology. So I became a specialist in how diversity influences ecosystem functioning and invasion processes, like how, if we start losing species in ecosystems, how does that affect the way that they're invaded, right? And a lot of this is informed about what happens on islands. And then, so I did work on that, mostly in the Sierra Nevadas and also on serpentine soil. If any of you are familiar with serpentine soil in California, it's a very special soil type that has very special plants on it. Really fun. And then I got grants to go to Mexico and do my postdoc work on buffalo grass. So anybody familiar with buffalo grass? Like if you go right south of San Antonio, it's just like buffalo grass city, right? And then you hit San Antonio, it's KR Blue Star. So they transition. So this is more of a tropical grass, right? That's been introduced to improve degraded rangelands after you destroy them. And so I studied that in Mexico, in Sonora, in the Sonoran Desert, and that was super fun because then I got to come full circle and use my undergraduate degree and kumbaya. And then this job came available at Trinity, so I got to come home. And when I got home, I realized, oh wow, when I lived here, I really didn't pay attention to grasslands. I didn't know that much about them, but I knew that something had shifted and that things had really changed. And so I started doing restoration ecology mostly because it's my home and I really wanted to restore grasslands. And so I went from studying, the influences of diversity on grasslands and how they get invaded to looking at the impact of invasive species, and then now wanting to do more reparation. But it was a new field for me, getting into restoration ecology. So I've been doing that for about 12 years. And now I've gotten more into fungal endophytes. So what fungi are doing that live inside the grasses. We've done a lot of research on arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. Those are mutualist grasses. But there are all these other fungi that we're isolating from grasses that we don't even know who they are. I mean, we call them operational taxonomic units. We don't even call them species. And we have isolated in my lab probably 400 different morphotypes that are now getting analyzed by DNA by my colleague at the University of Tennessee. And so it's like a brave new world out there. We really don't know what they're doing. So right now we're trying to characterize them and see what they're up to. So that's kind of my story. So those are my expertise, and now I consult a lot on ranches. People call me all the time, want to know what to do, and I always start with, well, what are your management goals, right? What are you managing for? And most people in this room probably are really interested in what native plant species can do for all the other species, right? You know that that's the foundation of everything, right? I always say, you know, you have to have those plants to have any sort of food web interactions, right? Any of the higher order stuff. Okay, so that's my story, and I'm going to ask you some questions. So if you have a phone on you and you would like to do this, engage with it, we can also just shout out, which is fine with me. But I use this website called Poll EV, Poll Everywhere, and you can use this code if you get in there, and the questions will come up on your phone and you can answer them that way if you'd like. But I can also take them verbally because I know that you probably feel mixed about using your phone this way, and that will be at the top of the slides. So first I'm going to talk about novel world questions like this new existential crisis we're in. One of the things that I've been really struggling with over the last couple of years is, you know, it's pretty obvious that our touchstone for restoration is pre-European settlement, right? What was happening in the United States as far as plants go and floras before Europeans arrived. So that's, you know, Native Americans had a big impact, of course, on the flora and fauna, but most of the time, restoration ecologists will use pre-European settlement as a touchstone for North America. But now with climate change, now what? What is the target? What is the appropriate target? And should we be thinking more about climate-ready species, maybe that are more southern in their distribution, more Mexican, for restoration, right? Are the plants that we're using now in Texas always going to be those appropriate species for the place where we are? And then I want to talk a little bit about my perspective on native and exotic species because I think it's kind of a mess. And then I just want to talk to you guys about tell me what to plant, which is always what people want to know. Okay, so I have to log in here. You know what, let's not do this. Let's just, we're gonna have to do it because I can't use my slides without it. Let me see if I can log in. Well, you can see it at the top. If you need to log in, it's at the top, okay? All right, so using your computer or phone, click the general location of your ranching operation or where your property is or anything like that. So I use this slide a lot for ranch owners. Some of the people I have worked with on these, apologies that this didn't get cleared, but where can you click where you are? Are you able to log in and use it? Anybody? Yes. Okay. There we go. Okay, good. They should be dropping in. So you're all very, very close, of course, around here. And naturally, because this is a local talk. So who is this that just went here? Who's that? Is that you? Where are you ranching or where are you working? Somebody just dropped that. Somewhere in maybe Colorado, Oklahoma, Colorado. Who is this? Oh, they disappeared. Who's that? You can't zoom in. All right. Okay. Let's skip this one. Okay, let's skip this one. Oklahoma border. Okay. Somebody's in the Gulf of Mexico. That's hilarious. Okay, let's skip this question now. Okay. So here's the existential crisis. When considering plant species for urban landscapes or restoration, why should you use natives, not exotics? How many of you use exclusively natives in your garden? And so the question is why? Do we need to do that? Why not plants that are exotic or sort of peripheral even, right? We could use Trans-Pecos species or we can use species that are more Mexican. Should we focus on the past or should we be thinking about novel future environments? So I want to know your favorite invasive exotic species that grows in Texas. Yeah. Or in this area. Go ahead. Go ahead. Your favorite invasive. I can't hear you. I'm sorry. What's that? Ligustrum. Okay, your favorite. Is that working? Indian grass.
Favorite, like in a good way, or favorite in a bad way?
Your favorite. Just your favorite. Sometimes there's favorite invasives, right? That you just don't really like. Tropical milkweed. That's a really good one, right?
I like it and I just cut it down.
Tropical milkweed is a terrific one. Yeah. Somebody named Indian grass. That's native and it's not considered invasive. As a matter of fact, it's hard to grow. Vitex, right? Okay, good. Vitex I love because it's pretty. It attracts a lot of insects, right? Lots of people have planted. There are also sort of like heirloom Vitex in people's yards, right? It comes up there with with crepe myrtles, right? There's all these old crepe myrtles that are, you just hate to cut down. So I put that one up there. I don't know balloon vine. What is that? Tell me. It's also called what? Love and a puff. So who wouldn't love that? Is it kind of aggressive?
Yeah.
Okay, it can be aggressive. It's always a fine line between, right, really good ground cover and an invasive species. Crap myrtle. Crapper myrtle. So is that just a thumb problem, or you really call it that? I was just like pyracantha. Right. Another one that was used really widely, like in the 50s or something. I'm trying to find if I have like a pointer. I don't know if I do. Shrimp plant. So that one's, I don't know if you consider it invasive, but it's Australian, right? There's a native shrimp plant. What do you call that?
Oh.
Okay, Nandina, my university still plants that stuff. And actually, I just had a whole bunch of students pull it out. And they were like, but what if somebody says something? I'm like, let them say, I don't know. They're like guerrilla gardening. I don't really care. And then, you know, what's funny is our students are so nice. I'm like, why are you so nice? I don't understand you guys. Like, I would not like you, right? Okay, good. So these are good answers. Chinese tallows, it's tricky, a really tricky one, right? I mean, it's just so prolific and it's really, really invasive. Great. Okay, so you're getting the idea. All right, name your favorite non-invasive exotic species that grows or is grown in Central Texas. Non-invasive.
Milkweed. Which kind of milkweed?
So not invasive. I wouldn't call tropical milkweed invasive, but I would call it problematic, right? Because of
the fungus.
plumbago. What is with the Indian grass? Non-invasive exotic. So Salvia greggii, who put that up? You consider that exotic? Salvia greggii is generally considered native, although it's Chihuahuan desert. Esperanza is native.
What about private Barbados?
So do we know what native is? Right.
It's part of Barbados.
Right.
Native or exotic?
What's that?
It's part of Barbados, native or
It's
native?
exotic.
It's exotic.
Pride of Barbados is exotic. It's not invasive here, but it is invasive in parts of the world, like in Cuba and other places. Right. So when I get to this question, I mean, think about like things like tomatoes, right? You grow tomatoes in your garden and they're super well behaved, right? They don't go, and you'd like for them to be more invasive, right? You'd like for them to be more homogeneous and grow better. Yeah. There are a lot of exotic agaves that are really beautiful, and a lot of them are hybridized, right? That are in horticultural use. They can be a little invasive, right? You have to kind of stay on top of them sometimes, but they're nothing like aloe or aloe vera, things like that. I don't know crown flower. Somebody want to tell me?
It's also called giant milkweed or giant caltrop.
It's also called what? Oh, giant caltrop. Okay. Right. Hi. Good to see you. Giant caltrop. Right. And that is yeah, giant caltrop. So those are the ones that are they not native? I thought they were native and they're just kind of invasive. What's that? They're North African. And there's Zygophyllaceae, right? That's the one you're talking about? The caltrops. Yeah, okay. They're puncture vine, they call them also, right? Yeah, we're thinking of different ones.
I know it has giant milkweed or giant sunflower.
So it's in the milkweed family. Okay. Okay, so it's not Zygophyllaceae. Okay, see, I call caltrops. You know those puncture vines? That's what I've referred to as caltrops. So that's a different caltrop. Okay, problem with common names. Okay, it's okay. I'm getting at this because there are so many plants that we bring into our environment that we put in gardening settings, right? Vegetable crops, all that kind of stuff, that really, really well-behaved exotic species that we love, that we can grow, that are safe to grow, right? And so the question for me is often, people always ask me, like, should I go all native? And I prefer going all native, but there are things I just love to grow, as long as they're not going to be invasive. Like, for example, Mexican olive, right? How many of you have a Mexican olive tree, right? Do you like it? Beautiful, right? Beautiful tree. What if you're in Houston and you have Mexican olive? Is that something that you would want to grow there? I would not recommend Mexican olive if I lived in Houston, because it's very invasive there and it's really homogenizing. But here, since it's not so wet, right? We have a lot drier climate. It's pretty safe to have Mexican olive in your garden. It freezes, yeah. So it's right. So does it freeze back? I mean, you have one. Where are you?
Yeah, but he's in San Antonio.
Oh, you're in San Antonio. Yeah, it's warmer. Yeah, so maybe, yeah, so you can't grow them. They take a little bit of work, right? So that's a good sign. Oh, really? There's a nice one behind the San Fernando Cathedral too. Yeah, interesting. Okay, so that's just getting at that question. So here's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service definition for native. A native species is a species that historically occurs or occurred in that particular habitat, in its historical habitat, right? Pretty straightforward, right? This is a pretty decent. No, why? Who said no? 100%. Okay, why?
You want to differentiate between historically. Sometimes we say, like, NPSOT, because due to human intervention.
Due to human intervention.
Right. If a plant comes to this country due to human intervention.
Okay.
It is not native.
Okay, but what about when the humans were Native Americans and they were moving plants around?
Human intervention, right?
Right, but then that means that a lot of plants that were here pre-European settlement would not be considered native. You can see it in the fossil record, actually, for the pollen record. You can track it through a pollen record, and it's a good question, right? So this is what I'm asking, like, how far back do we go? And for restoration ecologists, you have to make a cutoff, right? You have to just tamp down the chatter and make a decision about where you're going to draw the line.
Like who were the native?
What is a human? Is a human? Well, it turns out, I guess not, right? Because we think, yeah, right, is it Neanderthal? Right, and then there was the whole mass kill thing, right? As humans came across the Bering Strait into North America, right? There was this mass kill, a wave of humans that caused a lot of extinctions during the Pleistocene, right? Yeah.
So it's, and you know, like, so to prevent drought, to we adopt develop.
It's a good question. If we want to plan ahead, I think we do. And you know what I've been doing with a girlfriend of mine is we go out on Sundays and we look for plants that have been thriving during this time right now, like Esperanza. Come on, no brainer, right? That thing, like, it's flowering and there's no water. I don't understand that plant. I really don't. Like, I'm like, is it tapping? It must be going so deep, like just driving its roots, right? That, and you know, Siniso, and there's just these like super good holdouts that we're going to be able to use, right? And then other ones, like, I mean, I don't know if we can ever plant rosemary again, you know, safely. Just like everywhere I look, it's like, and it shouldn't be like, it's like, it's Mediterranean. You need to put it in a pot, you know, if you really want to keep it. I have friends who had a beautiful beautiful rosemary hedge before Uri, and I mean, and it was going strong, and I couldn't explain it to them. I was like, it shouldn't be doing so well. And then sure enough, it's just dead as a doornail after that. Yeah.
And the tree is actually going to be part of what determining whether it's native to a particular area or not. We're talking about moving plants from a more southern area to a northern area because of the temperature of changes.
Sure.
How that comes into play when you start talking about historical.
Right. Well, I think this whole concept of novel ecosystems. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the book that came out on novel ecosystems by Richard Hobbs. He's one of, people refer to him as one of the silverbacks of restoration, which I really hate. I really, really hate it because it's like, it's really rough for women to hear that, but also it's like kind of not nice to him. But he wrote this book called Novel Ecosystems with a couple of other co-authors, and it was like a turd in a punch bowl. I do not kid you. The restoration community did not take to it well, right? But we know that, and I've been talking more about like, what are climate adapter, climate ready natives looking like, right? So I think that's language we could adopt safely. And there's no reason why native plant societies can't be thinking about that more aggressively. Yeah.
Hey, our lipstick, it froze.
It froze? It grows. Yeah. I mean, okay, don't get me started. That is my target. Like, that's the species I study. And now we're actually developing a key right now for all those old world blue stems, because you probably have a lot more Clayburgh blue stem in your yards than you think, and Australian. So we're developing a key that will be easy for you to use, so you can tell which one you have in your yard. Yeah, but it's a hard one. Yeah.
Very froze serves as really good base for snapback.
Can you say that again? Yeah, it has been doing so well this year, right? Yeah, a nurse plant, like a nurse plant. Yeah. I've been really impressed with Snapdragon Vine this year. Amazing. Yeah. You did come back. Yeah, they're cool. really cool. Hard to get established though, right? I think they tried to establish one in their yard. What do? You just throw the seed out, or what? Okay. You did? Yeah. Yeah. I think it's delicate too. Okay. Yeah. So you can imagine that when you really start talking about these things, it's almost like, shh, talk about it. Like, because you're just opening like cans of worms everywhere that are crazy, but we kind of need to decide how we're going to move into the future on this question. Okay, so here's the definition of exotic. An exotic species is any species, including its seeds, eggs, spores, or other biological material capable of propagating that species. I don't know why they can't just say the propagules, but anyway, that is not native to that habitat. Okay, so that you have to use this definition to do this definition, right? Okay, so, okay, good enough. It's kind of the opposite of native, right? Okay, here's the problematic part though. What is invasive? An invasive species is an exotic species whose introduction into an ecosystem in which it is not native causes or is likely to cause environmental or economic harm or harm to human health. Right, this is, yeah, well, sometimes like, well, certainly grasses, right, can be.
Fishes that can,
Mm-hmm.
shellfish.
Especially those carp that jump out of the water and smack you broadside. I mean, those are really dangerous. Like, so there are, yeah, sure. Well, like you can imagine like algal blooms or things like that that really do hurt people. Yeah.
If it's providing food for our animals in the habitat.
Right. Mm-hmm. So is it mucking up the, like, that's where the environmental part comes in. I can't find my little pointer. Is this it? Ah, there it is. The environmental part comes in, right? Where it's having real environmental impact. I was surprised by what happened with the zebra mussels. You know, remember this?
Yeah.
Remember the fouling situation that happened, the water fouling situation that happened in Austin? They tried to keep that under wraps, but what apparently happened is that they put in a pesticide to kill the zebra mussels that had built up inside the pipes. And when those organisms died, that fouled the water system, rotting zebra mussel bodies. Yeah, so yeah. Oh, you saw it here, right? This word, not native to that habitat. Right, so then native comes in, you know, was it originally there? But like you say, habitat can change, right? And with climate change, the habitat might change, right? Yeah, right. The one plant I see planted that I don't think is doing great is Mexican feathergrass. And when you see where that's actually growing in Mexico, you realize why it doesn't do so great here. It grows in a high altitude arid ecosystem, right? It needs a little bit of cool. It's more of a cool weather species than, and so when it dies, it's like dormant here a lot, right? And people get frustrated with it. I'm like, well, it should be in Saltillo. So yeah. Okay, so this definition is problematic for me because I believe it conflates the invasive with the exotic, right? And so that brings up this question. Can you name an invasive native species that grows in central Texas? Yeah. What? Juniper. Ash juniper is the perfect example. And people don't, you know, it's being maligned. And now this book just came out like saying, we maligned it and that should make you feel bad, you know, like all that kind of stuff. But, and prickly pear is a good example too. There's a lot of native prickly pears that can become very invasive. So why are these species becoming invasive? What's the driver? Right, it's the management, right? Our management approach, right? And mesquite's a good one. Mesquite may not be native, right? It's questionable how far north it was before. Hang on a second. And right before it was, you know, the cattle were moving so much in this environment. So human management is what changed the relationship of these species with the environment, right? And so with prickly pear, you know, it's kind of a grazing issue, right? These are increasers under grazing because the cattle avoid them, so they increase. Ash juniper maybe also, for a long time we thought that was a grazing issue, but now we know it's more than likely fire. But it could be also CO2 enrichment. We know that CO2 enriching the atmosphere can give a competitive advantage to these woody species. It's kind of it's a physiological thing. If you know much about C3, C4 plants, grasses, all the grasses almost the grasses we have are C4, and ash juniper is C3. And
why you think ash juniper didn't come from overgrazing, it came from fire?
We think it's because of fire suppression.
I thought it was
It's mixed. Well, it's mixed, right? In the seedling stage, cattle will eat it a little bit, but it is very prickly at that stage. So it probably did increase initially because of the grazing management, but it's also the
Native American
the suppression of fire. And this is only for the blueberry juniper. The red berry actually isn't affected by fire in the same way. So yeah. Okay. Did you have a question? Yeah.
So I always refer to invasive as exotic, noxious plants, and I always refer to invasive native as just noxious native. Like asking the president call it invasive or mosquito, I wouldn't call it invasive as in it doesn't belong, but it's noxious rather.
Uh-huh. Well, and some people, I always talk about them behaving badly or something like that, or homogenizing is something I've adopted. They homogenize the landscape, right, at the expense of other species. So, or they displace other species, right? Things like that. Noxious is actually kind of hard to use because it actually is a federal term. So you have to be cautious because people get upset if you use it, because it has a federal, opportunistic or like. Yeah, like,
Right. They take
like, yeah.
advantage. Exactly.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. Yeah, that they're opportunistic. Right. Yeah. Right. I mean, you can't malign them. That's not their fault. That's right. Did you have a question?
We need them for the fire.
Well, weed, yeah, and weed is kind of a hard one because usually the definition for weed is a plant that's in a plant that's out of place or a plant that's not wanted. It's been the one that people use typically, so. Right. Well, I'm a weed specialist, right? People call me that. We had a president at Trinity that was like, she's a weed specialist and she studies grasses and she's going to Hawaii, like with students. So that was pretty good. Kudzu?
That's the worst of all time.
Kudzu's the worst. Kudzu's the worst. And it is exotic. Yeah, it's exotic and invasive. Yeah. And it can grow a couple feet a day. It is literally the worst. Literally the worst, yeah. Okay, so this gets into like why natives for me. And when somebody asks me like, why do you have to be so strict about natives? Well, this is why, because most invasive species are exotic species, right? If you don't want to have an invasive species problem, don't plant exotics, right? Because the likelihood of a species becoming invasive if you use natives is very low. Right? Almost non-existent, right? I mean, you have natives that can take over your garden or whatever, and it's always a fine line. But the likelihood of if you're going to risk it, right? It's going to be more likely to risk it. You're going to be more likely to get in trouble if you have an exotic species. That's my point. And there's papers that have been come out about this. That the introduction of exotic species. This paper on invasive species starts with the introduction of exotic species. And this is a scientific journal article, right? And it goes through, native elsewhere, what happens, this is the invasion process, and then we get this habitat homogenization, which is the word I prefer to use, is homogenizing. Because that gets into the question of diversity. What happens to diversity? Well, these homogenize the landscape. You see what happens in a field of KR, right? Especially if it's been heavily grazed in the past, you get almost all KR. So it's homogenizing, right? And it sticks. Okay, so you can see how messy this can get especially when you get into the federal stuff. But yeah, so this is of course our lovely plant, and it's really valuable, right? What value does it have for golden cheek warbler, right? Right, nesting materials.
The only thing they use.
It's the only thing they use. Yep, and only mature ones too. So it has to be a special kind. I think we've got enough of them though. I don't think it's going to be an issue. Oh yeah, erosion control, those kinds of things. So I wanted to tell you a fun invasion story. So we were talking about prickly pear, right? And prickly pear, you've seen how it can be invasive here under heavy grazing. Well, when it was moved to Australia, it became incredibly invasive. And so this is my favorite invasion story. And you can see like in some places in Australia, it became like trees. Look at this human here. And this is how these are the rangelands were covered in this. And I've asked a lot of people, and I've done a lot of studies as to why it was moved to Australia. And some people say it was for the cochineal industry. And one of the reasons, there's this beautiful book on cochineal that just came out called A Red Like No Other. And they suggest that there was lots of secrecy about using cochineal for dyes because there was no red dye before people got to the New World, right, for Europeans. And so it was kind of under wraps. And so it may be that the prickly pear cactus was moved to Australia for the cochineal industry, but it was kept under wraps and there's not good records about it because they were trying to hide it, right? But also I've read that it was used for hedgerows, which is like, oh shit, like that's kind of a rough hedgerow. So this is what cochineal looks like. You probably have, has anybody ever dyed Easter eggs with it? It's really fun. It's a blast. You can just scrape it. It makes purples and reds, and depending on the amount of vinegar. And I haven't played with it enough to get the colors right, but it's super fun for kids. And of course, this is from if you're familiar with the Sagun codices, there's lots of information there about cochineal. It goes so far back in antiquities and Aztec culture. Cochineal on the prickly pear cactus. So this is prickly pear cactus. And have you ever seen the white? You just scrape it, and you can scrape it into a bowl or a bag or whatever, take it home. And when you squish it, the bugs, it's a scale insect, and the bugs release a red dye. And so you mix that with a little bit of vinegar. There's all sorts of instructions on it online. And you like, and
used it, right?
they used it for dyeing. Yeah. Yep. So this is what the scale insect looks like. Those are little bugs. And when you have to kill them to use it.
So they're not bad. They're not bad for the plant. They live.
No, they're bad for the
symbiotically.
plant.
Oh,
No.
they are
Yeah, they're sapping resources of the plant. Yeah. It's a suck. It's hemipterin, right? I think they're hemipterin.
bad. Okay.
Yeah. So this is going all the way, if you look into inking culture too, it goes all the way, the use of this dye goes all the way down to South America. Yeah, gorgeous, right? Okay, so what happened? What they did was to control this Australian invasion, they found this cactus moth, yeah, in South America, and they named it Cactoblastic cactorum. And you cannot make this up, right? This is a biocontrol story, right? So it's like this. I love this because it's the hubris of humans. Okay, so we introduced this. It became invasive. We found a bug to introduce there, to control it, and it was actually very successful. So this is like a before and after picture of what happens when you introduce this Cactoblastis cactorum bug. It's a moth, by the way, and this is the larva of the moth. Okay, so that's great. Control of prickly pear, that worked. And look, it's like this big truck. It has the name of they have grubs. They're calling them grubs, which is not correct, but okay. And so it was very successful in biocontrol experiment. So what happened then is, so their first this Cactoblastis cactorum was introduced here. They then moved it around places to control prickly pear cactus, like for example, in the West Indies, they moved it because it was nopal or what do you call it? Prickly pear was growing on beaches and things like that. So they would introduce it and then would get rid of the prickly pear cactus off the beach because nobody wants to do that in their bathing suit, right? Of course. So then, of course, this thing starts invading into North America, and it starts marching across the United States. And in Mexico, of course, they're not very happy about that. And they did find one population in the Yucatan in the past, and they were able to eradicate it. But now it's really marching across. It's not quite there yet. But this is showing you the suitability of North America for the Cactoblastis cactorum, right? So you can see that yellow means that it's a low suitability area, orange is high, and blues are where there's a lot of apuncha, right, or a lot of the prickly pear. So, but the thing is this, it's marching across, and it's now, this is the latest map I could find was this one, showing that it has been found in New Orleans. And I think, what's that? Columbus, Texas, right on the border, right? Columbus. I thought there was one near Shreveport. Okay. So y'all know about that, right? So this is the story. Oh, this is the latest that I found showing where it was found in Texas. So we're getting there. Okay. So back to this. So why natives? Why not exotics? I think we kind of covered that. And should we focus on the past or novel environments? So how many of you are familiar with this species? Why are you familiar with it?
For winter.
Winter?
So that they have a breed long.
Yeah. Annual ryegrass. Yeah. Does anybody know where it's from? It's Mediterranean. Okay. I just wrote an article about this in the San Antonio report that was not very widely read because I cannot write an article that's like simple, and I swear it was really not that well written for the target audience. But these are grasses that were introduced first into California by the Spaniards, and it's not clear if it was accidental or on purpose, but we think it was probably on purpose for forage, and they were more comfortable with these grasses that are from the Mediterranean. So this is annual ryegrass. Lots of people will introduce it and say, like, after there's like big highways go through, and TCEQ requires that there be revegetation. People will use ryegrass, right, because it stabilizes soils and it goes away. The problem is it's not going away now, and it's actually reproducing. And so it's starting to become invasive now in this part of the world, just like in California. This too, I'm finding wild oats, also Mediterranean, not native. Do not buy this stuff. Douglas King Seed is still selling it. They are dumping it on the market. And the reason they're dumping it on the market is because they're getting it virtually for free from California because it's invasive there. And so they just harvest it and bring it to Texas, and they're selling it for like $1 a pound. I'm not kidding. I'm talking to Forrest Smith about it at Douglas King and asking him, please stop selling it, but they won't. They're just like, oh, here. And by the way, take this big bunch of, Mediterranean annuals. And what's really disturbing is if you look at Texas AgriLife website, managing winter annual grasses in South and Southwest Texas, no mention of them being exotic. And then they put a whole table in there showing you how to use them. No mention of their provenance.
Why do they do that?
I don't know, but could y'all please all write to them? Yes, I was going to say money, but okay, greed. Yeah. Rye is a different species altogether. Rye is, so ryegrass is lolium, and rye is, I'll think of it in a minute. So there's avena, barley, it's not barley, rye. I'll think of it in a minute. Just give me a second. But it's a different genus. Yeah, different genus. But all of them are annual grasses, and they are all C3, which is why you C3 cool season grasses, which is why you see them in the winter, right? They grow in the winter, and then in the past they would just kind of disappear and they wouldn't do very well. But since our winters are becoming a little bit wetter, a little bit more mild, I mean, urea aside, they're persisting and they're reproducing. Okay, we need to stop it. This is what annual Mediterranean grasses look like in California. This is what these grasslands look like. This is what it does. And if you think about things like, is anybody familiar with cheatgrass ecosystems, right? The grass comes in, it's green, and then it's brown by May or June, and it's just bare soil. And so this is what I'm seeing. I'm seeing a lot of these grasses being used for things like pig farming and stuff like that, and they're just destroying the soil, wrecking the soil. So another thing this is another Mediterranean annual that I have found here quite a bit is Malta thistle, and the other one I'm finding is yellow star thistle, also a Mediterranean annual. And this will wreck a grassland. I don't know if you ever walked through a field of this stuff. I did my PhD in California, so I had to walk through fields of it. It was horrible, the worst, and cattle, of course, hate it. Bastard cabbage, another sign that our climate's changing because we're seeing much more bastard cabbage, right? Mediterranean annual mustard. And this is, oh, I mixed these up, sorry. This is what a field of yellow star thistle looks like. Come on, totally homogeneous, pokey, awful. So this is the article I wrote, and I'd love it if you guys would share it more because we really need to spread the word that these Mediterranean annuals, we need to stop selling them. We need to stop using them because we're going to transition our grasslands from perennial grasslands to annual grasslands, which is what happened in California, and they're just not as productive, right? So you think ranching's hard now? Try ranching with just annuals. It's the worst, right? Not good. I wish I could take everybody to California so you could see the damage. I mean, those grasslands were transitioned during the Spanish, during the mission times in California. So it happened a long time ago. Okay. Are there any plants you think should be discouraged from urban gardens? What's that? Bermuda grass. I kind of given up on Bermuda grass. Like, it's so useful. You can drive your car on it, and you can. Nandina. I agree with you. Yes, I wish we could stop using Nandina. If I can't, I gotta get Trinity to set an example for that. What's that? Bamboo, absolutely. Bamboo is the word. Not the clumping bamboo, but the spreading bamboo. Right? You can safely use those giant, beautiful clumping bamboos. They've got some of them in the zoo that are really great, but the really thin stalked spreading bamboo, arundo too. I had a neighbor who planted arundo in his yard, and I couldn't see his house like after about a year. And I went and told him about it because it's one of the top 10 worst weeds on the planet, right? And he just was like, I like it. And then eventually the city got after him because they had grown so much and they were falling over into the street, and he couldn't keep up with it, right? It was just a mess. So that's one that nobody should plant. I don't know why you would plant. I don't even know where you get it. What's that? Ligustrum? Do people still sell ligustrum? Really? Oh, that's crazy.
Burford holly,
What's that?
the Burford holly,
Burford holly? I don't know that one.
Burford something.
No,
No, the little
Bradford pear?
No, those little shrubs that have shiny green leaves,
It's a holly. It sounds like a holly.
but it's not from here.
Is it invasive?
No, but it's just like,
You just don't like it. Okay, don't go crazy. If you get crazy, people won't listen to you.
that's I know about COVID.
Yeah, be judicious.
But
the patina, but it's not invasive, right? It's ugly. Okay, the red tip patina. Yeah, this is what I get. Like, okay, people love it for hedging. I don't love it, but it's not causing any problems, really, right?
What about Vitek?
Pyracanthus, Vitex, these are all
So
problems. Yes.
focus your attention.
Be
on
very
the-
focused. Yes, don't go crazy.
Don't go crazy.
Don't go crazy. Yeah, I pick a yeah.
Pick your battle.
Yeah. I think we've covered this.
You should get rid of bypass.
Yeah, I think you should get rid of it. So this is The Land Ethic, right, by Aldo Leopold. The last word in ignorance is the man who says of an animal or plant, what good is it? If the land mechanism as a whole is good, then every part is good, whether we understand it or not. If the biota in the course of eons has built something something we like but do not understand, then who but a fool would discard seemingly useless parts? To keep every cog in wheel is the first precaution of intelligent tinkering. I love this. Yeah. So novel ecosystems, we're moving forward. This is one, a call for the defense of invasives. I can barely read this one without like, but it's happening. What's that? Yeah, and this is somebody who's just going to be famous because they wrote this book. They just put this title out there, right? That's like they're going to, it's really annoying. But this is the book I was telling you about by Richard Hobbs, the silverback that came out that was really hard on the restoration ecology. So the question I always ask is, Earth will survive us, but what world do we as humans and the contemporary stewards want to experience? Because we are now the contemporary stewards, right? I just read an article that suggested that there's now more mass of human-made things in the world than naturally occurring things, which makes us responsible for a lot, right? So, and you guys are already here because you already take that very seriously. So I'll just take any questions at this point. And I can't go into a lot of, I have a lot of data here, data, but I won't go into it unless somebody asks a specific question about that. Okay. All right. Tipping balance, the tipping point is if people start to use those plants, then the price goes down, right? Right. Which is why I was trying, when I first moved here, I was trying to get legislation passed to encourage, or actually to force TxDOT to use only natives and stop, because what they're doing is they'll plant natives with KR blue stem, and it's like, what's the point? You're just wasting seed at that point. But if we could get TxDOT to use natives exclusively, then that would really change the seed industry, right? So, but the unified development code for a small city like Boerne, you probably could get a unified development code that has guidelines for developers. Your city would be easy to do, I would. So how do you get, I think the problem is that most developers go in, they aren't from here, and then often, and it's cheaper to use non-native, There's no incentive, yeah. Right, okay, okay. One more.
What would you recommend that we do about fairness?
Okay, I do have a slide. I actually do. So we study in my lab, I do a lot of work with KR. And one of the things that we have found, we did this study where we seeded it, we plug planted it in, okay? But if you look at this figure, okay, just calm your eyes, okay? So what we find consistently over and over again is anywhere we put Cytotes grama into a mix, that's Cytotes grama, we get like a real, this is the amount of how well KR blue stem's doing is the y-axis, and this is a Cytotes grama planting, and also where Cytotes grama is present in all these plantings. So this is like nothing, big blue stem, little blue stem, Cytotes grama, yellow Indian grass, and then every possible species combination, and this is all of them. So this is like what diversity can do. This is what a really kick-ass native can do, okay? Is to decrease the presence of a KR blue stem. So my advice is always either plant side oats right away. If you remove KR blue stem, remove it, all right? And you can use herbicides you can burn. I burned. I don't like using herbicides, so I burned. I was lucky. I got the Nature Conservancy to help us out with this. And then immediately put in side oats. I find it's very suppressive. Then you can start to diversify afterwards. If you're going to plant anything but side oats, make sure you plant higher diversities, right? So if you have plants that are utilizing resources thoroughly in space and time together, they are going to be more competitive. So that's the data. And we find that this is my best slide is like, something is better than nothing. Like if you can get species restored after removal, you will suppress KR. If you have bare ground over here, no go, right? You don't even bother herbiciding if you are not going to restore afterwards. Don't bother. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know, because you know why? And we had silver in some of these, sorry. These are the 4 main species we use. This, I just kind of tried out these other species like green springletop, which doesn't hang out enough to compete with KR, but it is great. It does really well. It's hard to germinate. We've got a real problem germinating. It has like I don't know, like under 10% germination rate. So I was able to get plugs, and so I put it in just a few plots, and it's still today, even through that last drought, through this drought, it's doing really well. And it's congeneric. It's in the same genus as KR. So I want to be using, and you see it all over the place, right next side by side with KR, right? So we just haven't been able to grow it very well, but I think it's a great choice. Yeah, and it self-seeds. Like, and I have a green roof where I put it in, and I can't grow it, but it volunteers all over the place, right? Yeah. Yeah. Right. I think it's very competitive with KR. It's a good one. Absolutely. No, it's this one. This is purple 3-on, which I also love, but it's not as competitive as this. So side oats and silver, go for it, early successional. And then you can get the other stuff in later, the Indian grass and things like that you really love.
Do that.
Well, I want little blue stem to do well, and it does okay, but it's very slow growing. So it's not good for that initial, like, keep KR out. You just have to keep it out.
Then you, without doing anything,
Right.
originally you built blue stem, built a house,
Mhm.
driveway, and came KR along the
Mhm.
board, and blue stem is gradually as you move out.
It is slowly. It will do that. Just takes time. You could dump some side oats in there. I would do it now. Like, you know, right now, like how the ground is kind of dewy in the morning. That's a good time to try it. Yeah. Great. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me.